Hey guys, welcome to another Let Me Explain video. So today I'm going to be talking about the MCU and in particular the dumb humor that has plagued a lot of its recent films. And I'm going to be talking about exactly where did this trend start, because it didn't start with the MCU. So let's get into it. The MCU is arguably the greatest success in cinema history when you talk about franchises, and it's been so successful that it's actually rendered a lot of other genres as obsolete, particularly when you look at the likes of comedy. You know, as the MCU went on, it started to introduce more and more humor into their films. And so it came to the point where comedy films almost couldn't exist anymore, where they were looking at the MCU being like, well, how can we make a film when they are offering not only action, but comedy and all of that? We are essentially being replaced. And if you haven't noticed, there hasn't exactly been a lot of comedy films on offer in recent years at the theaters. And I think the MCU is probably the biggest part of that. And whilst this humor was actually handled really well in the early stages of the MCU, in the later stages it's kind of gotten out of hand to the point where everything is sort of very overly silly and stupid, and a lot of the characters are acting out of character just for the sake of a dumb joke. The humor in the recent films have trended more towards this meta style of joke telling, where essentially the jokes are more self-referential rather than like within the context of the story and the film. So instead of the characters telling the joke, it's almost like the writers like kind of winking to the audience and saying, yeah, we get it, we know this is silly too, and this is for you here. Like, you know, you can kind of see into what it's like for us to make these kind of films and how silly it is some of these characters are. And these kinds of laughs that they get are what I like to call as cinema laughs. And what I mean by that is they're the kind of laughs that you get out of a crowd that's in front, like that's all gathered together, where they feel comfortable watching a film and laughing out loud together. But if you're at home watching this film by yourself, you're not going to laugh pretty much at all at these jokes. And that's kind of the nature of these meta style jokes, where they kind of are very self-referential and making fun of themselves, and it's kind of like breaking that fourth wall within their own films. And so yes, they get the laughs in those cinemas when you have packed audiences and that, but they just don't work once you're no longer in that environment and you're just at home enjoying on your own. It just doesn't hit the same. And whilst MCU films kind of hold the reputation these days of having this dumb humor, it's not actually where it all started. It actually started much further back, and I've pinpointed it down to one particular film that I'm going to reveal today. And that film is Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl, released in 2003, starring Johnny Depp as the great Jack Sparrow. And you might be wondering, what the hell does Pirates of the Caribbean have to do with the MCU? Well, I'm going to explain it to you. You see, the first Pirates movie was an absolute runaway hit, and it turned Johnny Depp into an absolute megastar. His character portrayal of Jack Sparrow was just universally beloved. People couldn't get enough of him, and in particular the brand of humor that his character brought to these films. And the reason it works so well in the first Pirates movie is that, one, Jack is not really the main character. He kind of is, but he really isn't. And his sense of humor acts as a nice contrast to Orlando Bloom's character. And so you have this like an amazing adventure going on, and you have him, you know, wheeling out the laughs. But he's not always dishing out the laughs. Like, yes, he is funny in the way he acts and the way he does things, but it's not all about that all the time. But the lesson that they learned from that film, unfortunately, going into the sequels, is that we need to make Jack the main character, and we need to give him as many funny lines as we can all the time, because that's what audiences love. And they just completely overdid it. They just instead started to focus on giving him these jokes that were just either dumb or just out of character or out of context for the situation around them. You know, story be damned. They were just wanting to tell as many jokes as they could, and that's what the films essentially became about. And this gave birth to this trope that has plagued so many films since then, culminating in the MCU, obviously, but so many films where they introduce a character in one of their films, might not even be the main character, but they have a few lines or quips here and there that are funny, and they hit really well with the audiences. And the filmmakers take all the wrong lessons from that and just completely overdo it in the sequels. Even in comedy films, you can look at the Hangover films with Alan's character and Mr. Chow's character. You know, they had few lines here and there in the first one that were just bangers, but then they just made the second and third ones all about giving them, you know, dumb lines and funny things to say all the time. It just takes away from the story. You can even look at the likes of the Harry Potter films, where in the first few films, there is some humor sprinkled in there, but it's very much in-universe humor. Like, the characters actually relating to one another when they say these things. But then from really the fourth film onwards, the jokes start to get more meta, where they're trying to appeal to the audience watching rather than just actually having honest conversations and interactions with other characters in the universe. And so this definitely happened in the Lord of the Rings films. Even happened if you compare the Hobbit films to the Lord of the Rings, much more humor amongst the characters in the Hobbit as versus Lord of the Rings. And then you go fast forward all the way through to the MCU, and then you look at Tony Stark. So his first outing as Tony Stark and the first Iron Man, was a runaway success. The reason it was a runaway success, obviously it had the special effects, great story, great acting, all of that. But people loved Tony and his humor and his charisma. And what did they do with that? They made Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, where they just overdid it, particularly in Iron Man 2. And that was just a horrendous film. But they just overdid it with the jokes. And it's just how it's been since then. I've covered this in a previous video, but the involvement of the Guardians of the Galaxy, their introduction into the universe, took it up to another notch, where everything became about the humor with all the characters. You look at the likes of Thor, he was turned into a joke. Just so many characters it was all about just turning them into jokes and giving them as many laughs as possible, rather than telling a serious story with a bit of humor sprinkled throughout. It just almost became inverted, where it's like, let's make this as funny and silly as possible, and then occasionally switch it into serious mode. And I really hate this trope so much, because it's such a shame that the filmmakers cannot see the brilliance of their own creation when they do these things, because they don't realize that the reason these characters are beloved so much for their humor when they're introduced is because it's used rather sparingly. If it's just all the way throughout, they wouldn't be appreciated as much. You don't appreciate a joke unless there's a build-up, or unless there's a bit of a gap in between. If it's just joke, you can't take them seriously. And so that's just, and no, I have yet to see any real franchise be able to handle that aspect of a character really well, where few of their jokes hit and they just kind of keep them in character for the future films, and they just keep them at that same level. It's like, no, they always dial it up to 100 and just try to make them as funny as possible, because off of the back of those few jokes that really hit in their first film. And so yeah, bringing it back to Pirates of the Caribbean, I really believe that Jack Sparrow is almost patient zero for this dumb humor trend that has plagued so many of our favorite films and franchises, particularly sequels over the years. It's really where it all started. You had this brilliant introduction, brilliant character in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and unfortunately they learned all the wrong lessons of that and just dialed everything to 100 for all the sequel films. Anyways guys, that's my overall thoughts on this topic. I'd love to know what you think about this. Do you think that the humor trend started at Pirates of the Caribbean? Do you have a different film that you have in mind that you reckon started this whole trend? I'd love to hear it. I have no issues if you take issue with my opinion on where it all started, or if you had a film, I'm happy to be proven wrong. But that's where I kind of take it all back to. The first film that really sticks out to me as like, okay, this was a character that was funny, but then it just went way too far from there and went off the rails. Can't really think back before Jack Sparrow to a character that really happened to. So yeah, that's my thoughts guys. I'd love to hear yours, comment section below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye.